buy that much. You know? Well, maybe not. Maybe there's ways to help our soil and help our plants produce more nitrogen, make more nitrogen available to our crop, instead of like buying every single pound kind of thing. So think about some ideas. Of course, anything, when we think about nitrogen management, or how much nitrogen our crop is going to need, there's a lot of factors that go into that. I'm going to block you guys' way, but I don't want to stay back in the corner either. So things like crop rotation, do we have a legume in there before our corn, our grass crops? Can we put legumes in with, whether it's grass hay or something to get a nitrogen producing plant like a legume in before a nitrogen using crop like corn and that. Cover crops, where do they play a role? Can they generate some nitrogen? Certainly can. Residue management, we'll talk about that some. The residue that we have out there in those corn stalks, or it could be even dead thatch in our pastures, stuff like that, that's carbon, and that kind of soaks up and ties up nitrogen. So if we can break it down faster, we can free that up sooner. Of course, the varieties that we use, some really take more than others. Planting date, along with weather, how do we give our crop the best chance for success without having to really maybe give it extra in order to get it through a stressful time, kind of thing. Soil management, can we do anything to improve the tilth and structure of that soil, which then makes it capable of freeing up more nitrogen, more nutrients out of that soil for the crop, as opposed to being all blocky and chunky and tied up and just doesn't want to let anything loose, kind of thing. And then end fixing organisms, biology, that plays a big role, and we'll talk a lot about that. So we think one of the important principles in keeping total input requirements down is to spoon feed the crop. So in the conventional world, the thought is, oh, I'll just go out and put all my anhydrous on in the fall and I'll be done. Don't worry about it. Well, that takes more because it's not as efficient, right? We lose some in the meantime, or not all of it becomes available to the crop. So the idea of providing nutrients closer to when the plant needs it, and then picking the right choice of nutrients as to when it's going to become available, so it actually becomes available when the crop needs it. And as opposed to, let's say we base all of our inputs on manure. Well, early in the spring, the manure is not all available yet, right? It takes time to break down, and the soil has to warm up and things like that. So if we're planting corn in April, and we're trying to rely on all that manure to get it through, well, okay, in April it's still kind of short, it's starving because the manure isn't all available yet, right? So the timing of when something, we put it on and when it becomes available versus when the plant needs that, is the consideration there. And if we can split up our nutrients when it goes on, and then kind of spoon feed it, the plant more. And yes, that takes a little more management, a little more work, because it's not just the simple, easy way necessarily, but then we can be most efficient with the dollars that we spend and making sure more of it, gets to the plant, gets to the crop. So banding, and we'll talk about what we can do on the planter and how to get the crop started, that kind of thing. And banding is both in furrow and 2x2 at planting, but then also side dressing, or maybe doing something in a strip, like before planting. Put it down where your row's going to be, and then plant over top of that, or side dressing after the crop is up. So those are ways to focus those nutrients right in a specific spot, whether it's in the row or alongside the row or something like that. And then it's more efficient. You don't waste as much by, versus broadcasting over the entire soil, kind of thing. Grow more biology. We think there's just so much that can be done with a really active biological life out there in that soil that does so many things for that plant. And then foliar feeding, we'll talk about that, what we can do to get nutrients directly into the plant and how much less that actually takes. So we really believe not to just feed our crop N, P, and K. That's kind of the typical mindset is, well, I need X number of pounds of nitrogen and phos and potassium, and then I should be done, right? Well, if we make sure we give the plant everything it needs, like the micronutrients and things like sulfur and calcium and all these different nutrients, then it really doesn't take as many pounds of N, P, and K to grow an even better quality crop that way. So then also we like to use carbon, sugars, things like that, things that promote growth, and that's hormones and enzymes and products like seaweed and fulvic acids, different stuff like that. All things that really stimulate, give that plant energy. So it's not always just about the nutrients and how many pounds you put out there, but are you giving the plant things that really stimulate it to grow and grow more roots and be healthy and really function well. So a lot of those little tiny things can really make a big difference in the health of that plant and how it carries through stressful times and stuff. And then in reality, it doesn't take as much of nutrients like nitrogen. Then finally, biology. We're always trying to get more biology out there. So let's talk a little bit about biology. You say, well, we know it's great. You know, we want to have lots of organisms and live things in our soil. How do we build that? Well, first thing to think about is, are we doing things that promote microbes? Are we doing things that help the microbes flourish out there in that? Or are we doing some things that maybe are, knocking them back, not treating them so nice? Some of those practices can be the cover crops, about keeping something growing out there all the time. The microbes work in kind of combination with the roots out there. They like to live in a place that has growing roots. And those roots are giving off sugars and other compounds and stuff that really feed the biology. So the more months out of the year we can have something growing out there, that's going to help our biological life. So if we're in a straight like corn bean type rotation, and we take off our corn and beans in the fall and we just leave the ground bare and don't do anything until next May, and then we plant the new crop, well, maybe that's an opportunity to, if we can keep a little something growing out there, that then feeds our biology more and really builds the biology in the soil, and that improves tilth and just makes that soil so much nicer. Somehow and it can be hard to do sometimes, or we say that's doesn't fit our system, but to get away from any time we're just doing corn beans, or straight corn, or something like that, to get something else in there, whether that's small grains in a rotation, whether that's, of course, where we have hay involved, and that's a great thing, help break up the rotation, but even cover crops, even something for a short period of time, that's more months out of the year, that there's roots out there and a plant growing, and that's really a good place then for the biological life. We like to feed the microbes, so things like sugar and carbons, like the humic acids and stuff like that. And in reality, most fertilizers feed the microbes too. They consume some phosphorus and some nitrogen, and they need sulfur and things like that. It's kind of like ourselves as people, we need more than just one nutrient, right? We need a variety of things, and a little bit of all the trace elements and all that stuff. So, well, microbes do too in that. So they feed on that. There's a saying that one of the best things for biology is like a well-fed, productive crop. So grow a good crop, and that helps grow a lot of biology. We can do that. Then we really believe in inoculating with additional microbes. That's always trying to keep putting more out there and building diversity. So we have just more kinds out there. And our nature, the Lord, they all have a way of keeping balance out there. So if something becomes too much of one particular kind, well, then there's other organisms that kind of work on holding them back and returning things like to the right equilibrium, you know. And so we're not so much about targeting, oh, I need a specific bug, and that's exactly the one I need for this field kind of thing. We believe if we put a lot of diversity of good organisms out there on a regular basis, then the whole natural system of things will find out what, or know really what that soil needs and get things to kind of the right ratios of the right kinds of organisms and that kind of thing. So to think about as we're finished fall and then we're heading towards spring, think about residue management. What have we done with our crop residues? How have we taken care of them to either get them back into the soil, to build the soil, or how do we work with them to break them down as quickly as we can? Basically, what can we do to turn them into a positive asset that's building that soil and helping feed the next crop versus what we consider trash, something that's in the way and a nuisance, you know. So if we can really get it broken down, get it back into our soil, and get it biologically degraded, then that, number one, improves soil tilth, getting more carbon into our soil, especially in the clay type soils. That loosens the bonds of the clay and just creates a better structure out there. You know? The result of that is a better seed bed. When you work something up, it's not as chunky, and you know, if you have to always keep going over it with a cultipacker or something like that, well, then it's hard to create a good seed bed, right? You got a whole bunch of clods out there and not a nice mellow soil. And if we can do that, then there's also less weed pressure. If that soil is breathing and water drains and there's airflow through it, has structure, that's less conducive to weed seeds germinating out there. Other thing that happens when we get a lot of biological degradation in our soil is breaking down phytotoxic compounds. So that's diseases that want to carry over. That can be herbicide if we're in a conventional system, other chemical compounds, stuff like that. Just it's essentially bioremediation out in our fields. You know, the organisms, they're all working to break down things that they don't want there, that shouldn't be there. So whether that's chemical compounds, breaking down into simple carbons and simple chains, or in other cases, you have diseases, stuff like that that's carrying over. Less immobilization of nutrients for the next crop. We have good tilth, and we break down that residue, then we're freeing up the nutrients that are held in the residue and making that available for our next crop. The microbes out there are consuming that stuff, and then when microbes then die, then they release those nutrients, so it's available to the crop, that kind of thing. Then better tilth in our soil makes more nutrients available out of the soil. So, and generally, if we get residue broken down well, we get a faster start to the next crop, and we don't have a situation out there that's like dragging us down, slowing things down. So, as you well know, if you plant into a lot of residue, you have some things that can happen, whether it's poor germination, whether it's more trouble with soil-borne insects and grubs, different things like that like to live around the residue. Just things that can kind of slow down either germination or early growth of that plant, because the soil is still, the biology is still trying to deal with all this carbon material that's out there, and it's not quite ready to like move to growing a new crop kind of thing. These numbers are kind of old now, but it's saying 180 bushel corn crop. There's 8,000 pounds of corn stalks, corn stover out there, plus roots. And in that stover, the actual nutrient content of that is 80, 30, 190, more or less. There's different numbers out there. But it gives us the idea that there's a whole lot of nutrients, which is now a whole lot of value in that residue that's out there. So if we can break that down quickly, it becomes available to use to our next crop a lot faster. Number of times we go out in fields and you start digging down, and boy, I can identify the entire crop rotation the last 3 years here. Here's some corn stalks, and here's a crown of a bean plant, and here's even a crown of an alfalfa before that or something, and then you feel like, well, this soil's dead, it doesn't have biology. We can really get that biology working, and you break that stuff down, but then that's all nutrients that become available to the crop we're trying to grow now, instead of something that's kind of dragging us down.
Hey, Gary?
Yes.
Has anybody done a calculation on a given cover crop to come up with these kind of figures to figure what that might be other than nitrogen?
Exactly. I mean, with your legumes, they talk about how much nitrogen that can provide. So yeah, they looked at nitrogen numbers, but yeah, I don't really know on the other P and K and that kind of thing. Anything that has a lot of lignin in it, like corn stalks, like could be wheat stubble too, has a fair amount of potassium in it, and calcium usually, because that's what makes up those cells of that plant. Yeah.
Yeah, speaking of corn stalks residue, I would be interested to know if anybody's had any information on these new varieties of corn that won't decompose in the soil. You've got to have a combine that shreds it up real fine and try to get it into the ground. And then the wind comes along and blows it a mile across the field, so there's no corn stalks left on that field.
Yeah.
So what's the deal with the corn stalks that they won't rot down? Is there any studies to prove that the value of those corn stalks compared to the value of a normal corn stalk
changed? Or, that's one of the challenges we have in corn breeding. They want the plant to stand.
Is there any research on
right?
that? Has anybody ever researched
I
the seed that they can't break the corn stalks down to where they've got to blow them off and then they blow? I'm from Jay County, and I've seen corn stalks blow for a mile.
Yeah.
A mile. And the cornfield that they came off of is bare. They take them combines and they shred it right down to the ground. And when they get done, there's no residue left.
Yeah. If you don't work it into the soil, make some soil
So
contact.
pounds per acre, then they're not getting the value from their stalks at all.
Right. It'd be like baling them all
It's a nuisance. It's a nuisance, so we can use it.
Yeah. But no, and that's when we do these kind of programs to break down the residue, that's one of the things guys comment on now is that with corn breeding, so much as work goes into how do I get that thing to stand as long as possible, right? We don't want it to fall down before we harvest it, yeah. But then once we've harvested, we do want it to break down. So that is more of a challenge nowadays than it used to be, certainly. But we can really see that if we can get biology out there working on those stalks or on whatever residue that is, we can really use the biology to break it down and decompose it. Now there's a couple principles to that, and one is to get it in contact with the soil. That's where, like you say, if you're shredding it and just leaving it on top, but you don't do anything to get a little soil contact, get it mixed in just a little bit at least, then you're certainly more prone to blowing away and that kind of thing.
You know if that's GMO corn that you're talking about?
Well, I don't know what
it is.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. It's not anything that I would want to plant. But I remember when no-till first came along, if you had a field of corn stalks and you no-tilled soybeans in there, they did good. And now there's no difference if there's corn stalks there with bean stalks. I mean, to me, I would like to see some research to say on these big seed companies that are promoting all this seed that the corn is like plastic. What value is that for fertilizer? You said 8,000 pounds to the acre. What value are we getting from the corn stalks is my question, compared to what we used to get from the conventional corn.
Yeah, good question.
I mean, I haven't seen any data or anything even.
Yeah.
Well, the GMO stocks are just tearing up tires. I mean, they're so hard.
Yeah.
They're like bamboo.
No, for the most part, when you're talking GMO, there's some difference between Roundup Ready and BT. I think the BT type stalks do have a tougher time to get broken down. I knew that Pioneer, and I think quite a bit of Pioneer, but they breed their corn just naturally, so it's got a heavier stalk, and because they want to see it stand, so it makes sense to me and has for a long time to use some biology to break it down. You can go home and look at your own fields and see what's going on. So now, even with the light rains that we've had, if you're seeing your stalks and your fodder turning dark on you, you know that you've got some biology that's breaking it down. But if it's still shiny, there's probably not much biology in that soil. And so those are the fields that really you should be thinking about using some biology on to get it broken down. And then always, with the minimum tillage rigs that they've got these days, I think they can go in and run those colders and discs on it just to incorporate a little bit. If you get a little dirt on that, I think it improves your breakdown. If you get a little soil on that, you'll stop some of that blowing type thing that is going on. But what you really want to do is turn that into carbon that's good carbon for the next crop. Actually, as you're going through the process, you might as well do. If you're making a trip over the field, you might as well be doing some of this. Now, I'm like that gentleman. I see a lot of corn heads now that are doing a lot of grinding, and good or bad. I don't have one. I don't know how to rate it. But what we always did, we always went in and chopped and either pulled a disc or used some kind of a rig to incorporate a little bit of soil onto those stalks. I'm not in favor always of plowing in the fall, but with the organic people, they just about have to plow. A couple reasons is we have better weed control, we have better breakdown that's going on when we're doing that as well. And so it's easier. Some soils are easier to work when you can plow them in the fall and then they are in the spring. So that said, everyone does his own management to make sure that it's working. Usually what you'll end up with is, if it is working for the organic farmer, you'll have less weeds and you'll probably have higher yielding crops. So I'm not necessarily against no-till, but or am I against plowing? But I think you have to fit what works best into your own situation, and it depends on the area of the country you are too, and even the fall that you might have in the spring. I know we're pretty dry right now, so we need maybe an open soil without any tillage on it. The soil may glaze and water run off, but a soil that's got a little bit of tillage to it will probably absorb some of that rain and snow and hold a little better for next year. Because we've got a storage capacity in our soils that's unbelievable when it comes to moisture. And when we get too much, we curse it. When we don't get enough, we also curse it. But to find a happy medium, we need a good biological soil. A very active soil will give you that porosity that's needed to hold nutrients and moisture. Go ahead, Gary. I just had to address that a little bit because I wanted everyone to have the right idea on.
Yep. So what we like to do is using a product called Residue Stuff US, and those are mainly fungal cultures, fungal organisms. So it's their job to break down dead plant material. it doesn't hurt anything that's growing out there or anything that's alive. It's just breaking down dead stuff. And then we put with that some kind of food package because we want to feed the organisms and get them going in that. And there's mixes that we do with organic and conventional, but then a lot of guys also use like fish and molasses and just food type stuff that's going to really stimulate that activity. So we like to put that together and put it out there on the field. Of course, the ideal is in the fall after harvest, and while it's still a little warm out and there's soil temperatures that help start the process, start the breakdown. But we all know that that doesn't always happen, right? It's snowing by the time we get harvest done, or it turns cold early, or something like that, or it's wet. So in reality, a lot of our guys do it in the spring. They don't get it done in the fall, but they can put it on early spring. The advantage of still getting it on in the fall, even if it's getting cold in that, is okay, days like today, you got the bugs out there, and a day like today, they got water and some warmer temperatures, and they're just going to be out there kind of doing their thing. Then when it gets cold again, then they'll go dormant and they'll just go to sleep and wait. And then when it warms up again, they'll start up again. So, you know, if there is a way to get it out there in the fall, then it helps kind of make some things happen over the winter in that versus waiting till spring. But a lot of cases, yeah, we don't do it till spring, and then it's great to could be putting it on on top of a cover crop that we're turning down, or whether it's still corn stalks out there. A lot of guys will put it on hay ground and pasture and things to break down the thatch or break down the plants that have winter killed. We have people in the like lawn care industry and with golf courses that put it out there to break down the thatch that's built up over the winter. Just any situation like that. I show orchards and produce. I think with produce it's especially beneficial to you're breaking down any dead plant material, and that's really where your disease and insects are being carried over, like in the garden or in the produce patch. So you can really reduce the kind of disease pressure that builds up over time in those soils by just getting a lot of good bugs out there. Let's use good biology to kind of balance out the bad biology, you know. So whether it's fungal, bacterial diseases, things like that, can reduce that pressure. Orchards, I got a guy with an organic orchard outside of Detroit that he basically puts in a little bit of the residue powder like every time he's out there spraying. Because there's always things that are falling on the ground and he wants to break those down. Whether it's apples, whether it's leaves and things. Just trying, it's just that, it's called biosanitation. It's trying to keep the soil and the area around your crop, your things that you want, you know, free of more of the pathogens, the fungal diseases and things like that. And they say that if you do that, then things like apple scab and some of those kind of just perennial fungal or bacterial diseases that you have, like especially in orchards and trees, just are not as strong. They're just not as active then. Because we're getting good biology to keep working on them like all year round. But just in our crop situations, then really trying to break down that residue and prepare that soil for the next crop and make more nutrients available in that. A newer thing we've been doing in some cases is this MT17 program, and slide on that. And that's using a liquid product, a lot like the residues, but it's got a little more bacterial in it as well. And putting that on the soil along with, we want a soluble source of calcium. So there's kind of active soluble calcium out there working. And then also a carbon source. And that can be manure that we've spread, that can be the crop residues, it can be dry fertilizer that we spread out there, things like that. And that combination, basically, of biology with calcium, with carbon and nutrient sources, it just seems like you put those three together and you can really like actually change that tilt or structure of the soil. You can really start loosening things up and make the soil darker and build organic matter and starts to make all those things happen. So we kind of created this MT17 product kind of specifically for broadcasting on the soil and putting it out there in cases where you have put out manures or dry fertilizers, or it's not so much about crop residue as it is, other things we're trying to kind of break down out there in the soil. We think the calcium is a big part of this. It seems like when you get soluble calcium, and it's not just total calcium in the soil, it's about what's soluble, what's really available to the plant. But if we get a source of kind of available calcium out there with our biology and with our carbons and all that, then the whole process just seems to like work that much better, those three things in combination. First, a common one to use would be gypsum, putting gypsum out there in the spring before planting. And this is out of a book, but there's just all kinds of things that gypsum helps do in the soil. The biggest part of that is all these things here, reducing compaction, preventing crusting. It's all about soil structure and tilth. And it seems that gypsum just has a way of chemically loosening that soil and creating a better, fluffier, looser, better structure to that soil out there. Then we put that with biology and with these other carbons and stuff. Then we've created a situation where the soil is alive and it's loose and breathing and has nutrients in it, and it seems like all these things kind of work together.
Those that don't know it, gypsum, if you're conventional or organic, gypsum works for either system.
Yeah, and there's a couple of different ways you can go. There's pelletized gypsum, and that's where it's finely ground gypsum that's made into a pellet. And then when it gets moisture out in the soil, it breaks down. So it's real fine then. There's also just your ag grade type stuff, but then you got to watch how coarse is it versus how fine is it. Because the coarser stuff is just going to take longer to become available, longer to work. Yeah, it may be cheaper and you get more pounds on, but what we're trying to accomplish here, we want to think about how much is really available right away. Because that's what really changes our soil, the available part. This is a guy up in northern Illinois, and he put down 4 gallons of NP17 along with residues that was on corn stalks. There's 2 pictures here. Part of the field went back to corn, the other part went to beans. And our guy was out there late summer and was just amazed at the kind of soil structure, flocculation that he saw out there. And this was distant, the corn stalks were distant in the spring. There's 180 bushel corn there, so it was pretty decent stuff, a lot of residue. But by this point in, I think that's like September, there's just nothing to find out there really residue-wise in the soil. It just had such a nice structure and stuff. So really impressed by what it did to kind of change that soil. And this is in the kind of rolling hills in northern Illinois, not the greatest stuff in the world. So he really thought he was on the right track of really making improvement. I really think the best way to build a soil is to, one, grow a good crop, a healthy crop, get balanced fertility out there, not just NP and K, but kind of trying to get a little bit of everything. And looking at our soil test, do we have micronutrients? Are we addressing things like that? And then if we have well-fed crops and we have good fertility out there, then we're going to have well-fed microbes. And the microbes are going to do even more to help us out. So it's kind of like, good makes better and better makes best. And to get on that path of the soil really working on its own then to improve things and continue to give us good crops. We look at it when we invest in building the soil as opposed to just fertilizing the crop. And this is something long-term that pays us back. It's not just like I bought 200 pounds of nitrogen and put it on my corn at the end of that year, it's kind of gone, and you got to do it again, right? Well, we can build the soil and build life in the soil. That's there this year, it's there next year, and the year after, and it keeps paying us back, over and over. So when our pennies are tight, we got to look at how do I get the most out of what I'm doing. Let's try to put a little money into things that are going to keep paying us back. Not just investing in this year's crop. So really believe that when we build the soil, that's what we're doing. It's a long-term investment.
Gary,
Yeah.
I'd like to testify on a little thing that we learned after when we had started this thing. We pretty much hadn't added any additional farms to our program, and then one year we took on another 80-acre farm, and we had been farming right across the fence from it, so we knew the guy was doing a pretty good job with conventional farming. We were conventional back then, and so we were plowing our own soils or chiseling, and so we just naturally went into that new farm with a moldboard and pretty tight, heavy soils, Dark County soils, that very, very tough, blackjack, many people call it. And when we stuck the plow, we finished in one field right beside of it, went over, stuck the plow into this field. The plow wouldn't stay in the ground, so we put on new shears, still wouldn't stay in the ground. It was taking more power. We had to shift down. We actually couldn't pull it as good, so it took more fuel. And so we learned real quick how valuable this was. But to sit there on that farm and look across the fence and say that it was the same soil, we found different when we put that tillage into that soil, which was very eye-opening to us. Probably one of the most eye-opening things we saw after 6 years was just that fact that we knew that our soils were better, and we watched that then over the years. When we put on a new farm, we found the same occurrence going on with every new farm until we got things rolling on a good biological program.
So let's think a little bit about weeds out there. One of our goals is always to alter the environment of the soil so that it's more favorable to the crop and less favorable to the weeds. So when we think about practices we're going to do or inputs we're going to put on and all that, always want to think about, okay, how much is this helping my crop, but is it also like feeding all the weeds too, Or is it something that I'm doing that can then make the weeds less aggressive and less eager to grow and that kind of thing? This is a story from one of John Daniel Slaylaw's customers in Northeast Ohio, Worcester, Orville area, and that. He had an alfalfa grass hay field with dairy manure, poultry litter, plowed it down. He put on gypsum over the top. Then he used the mica treat on his planter, but that's kind of all that he did. He cultivated the field one time and decided, well, there really isn't any pressure out there. I don't need to go back and do it again. And at the end of the season, he really didn't have hardly any weeds out there. And we think the gypsum had a lot to do with that, but then also just what he's maybe done over the years, So it's a long process. It doesn't happen overnight. But
And he had trouble with weeds?
Prior to that, yeah, no, this field, it was in alfalfa grass hay, so it had been a few years since it was in a row crop. We all know that, if you plow down a hay field, and there's a lot less pressure that next year, kind of thing. But I guess one of the points we're trying to make is the gypsum, putting that on top after you plowed. With calcium can move down in the soil, but it can't move like up by itself. So we never want to like bury it deep. So if we're gonna plow, we plow first, then put our calcium on the top. And with the gypsum, you got some available soluble calcium and sulfur there, and that's staying then kind of right on the surface. If we can have soluble calcium on the surface, we don't generally get as much crusting of the soil, and that keeps it looser and better structure and that kind of thing. But weed seeds, they like to germinate when there's CO2. CO2 happens when you seal up the soil, and then the soil can't breathe, right? And the CO2 is trapped underneath the crust, and that's what germinates, especially your grasses and stuff like that. So
that also
the plowing, but then also using the gypsum to keep the surface real soft and loose. You know, that all contributed to less weed pressure then. Yeah.
that CO2 will also, when it's sealed in, will also bring on your seed corn maggot. Just that situation alone, we found. That was one of Reggie's findings.
This is down in the panhandle of Texas, and yeah, that's a different world down there than what we have here. But there's always valid things we can learn from that. Here he did a program with the MP17 biology, and he also put MVP, and that's more of our bacterial product that we'll talk about. But kind of a one-shot thing. So you put all that out there in front. I'm just going to put a lot of biology on the soil. This Oro RZ product, that's a sister to Oro Boost that we use, which is like a citric oil. We use it in foliars as like a penetrant or acidifying agent. But the RZ gives it like a soil penetrant type quality to it. Probably a soap type thing. Some of you may have used there's like Panhandler over the years and different soap type products to help penetrate the soil, you know, get into clay soils and loosen them up, that kind of thing. We'll also put a little seaweed in there and that. But in the spring and then early when the crop was small, and it was a very dry year out there, they were really dry. If you weren't irrigated, you didn't get much of anything, basically. But so the soil was very hard, very crusty, chunky, it was really tough. Now our rep that was out there, he was in that field toward harvest, and he's like, they have 150 bushel corn in dry land, never irrigated out there in a drought, and this soil is so like loose and spongy and just super nice till. So you know what happened from here to here? They didn't put anything else on or do anything else to the field. Well, to us it's the biology that's working out there. And it can actually change the soil and darken the soil and loosen it up and make all these things happen. So if the biology helped to feed the corn better, it carried through the stressful times of the drought better. It was able to get more water, more nutrients, keep going better. So there's kind of a stress tolerance thing that the biology helps with. And then if the crop was doing better, then it was giving off more sugars and things to feed the biology and keep it working in the soil. Probably keep a little bit more moisture there in the soil. So it's a continuing cycle that they help each other out. It's interesting that, yeah, we can put a bunch of bugs on, a bunch of microbes, not do a whole lot else, and it actually carried that crop through and made more bushels at the end, just because we did that. So it's kind of a neat story and example of the power of that biology to change the soil.
Now also, Gary, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
So there would be more stover too, because there's more bushel
Yeah,
crop,
150
strong.
bushel residue.
So then you're kind of re-implementing that into that cycle as well.
Yeah, so compare that to the neighbor that his dry land didn't amount to anything. It was probably a loss, and he got his insurance check, and he's still doing okay because he got his insurance, but that soil is gonna be a lot tougher to work with this coming year than this person's soil, where he's done some things to improve it now. So he's set up a lot there. It's gonna pay him back, not just this past year, but next year too. Going forward. So it was a good investment for him, certainly. I want to point out too, I think you've ever seen this. This is a book, When Weeds Talk, and Jay McCaman, the author, he's from up in Michigan. He did one before this called When Weeds Grow, I think. But it's interesting because he has a chart of all kinds of different weeds in here, and then the characteristics of when they like to grow, basically. So you can look up, like in this page, well, here's some of the mustards here at the top, Then you can go over and, well, calcium, very low, phosphorus, low, potassium, very high. So those are the situations where mustard likes to grow. And then it goes on over to trace minerals and soil types, conditions, all those kinds of things. And it's an interesting tool to look at. When you go out in the field and look at the weeds, what weeds are like growing the best. They grow great guns. So that's telling us, that's the Lord's, nature's way of telling us something about that soil. One, maybe what it needs. So, because that weed wants to grow when something is very short or out of balance, basically. So one of the things we're always trying to do is get that soil in better balance. And then there's just fewer situations where these weeds want to grow. Where they don't grow near as much. They might come up, but then they stay a little short. They're not very aggressive. That kind of thing. So I'll have this out all day. If anybody wants to look at it, you can certainly look at it. It's got his phone number in here. Just I have his phone number as well. If you ever want to get one of these, you can get them through the Acres USA online as well. But just an interesting thing to have, and really shows that we can build our structure of our soil and the nutrient balance of our soil, and not get out of whack so much with just N, P, and K, but get a balance of everything. Then it's interesting how, some of these critters here just aren't too interested in being there anymore. Or you have certain weeds that are hard seeds, and that seed lays out there for 50 years or something? And it's just waiting for the right conditions to come along for it to want to take off and grow. Well, if we can try to ensure it never sees the right conditions, then it can just stay there for a lifetime. We also believe that biology, if we have residue decomposers out there, they're going to work on degrading some of those harder seeds that are out there over time. And maybe some of those just aren't as viable anymore. They just don't want to grow that. It's not going to hurt a seed like a wheat or something that's going to sprout in a few days and come up right away. It's really the hard seeds laying out there for a long time that these organisms, the fungal stuff, just wants to kind of start chewing on that and feeding on it. So it's interesting stuff, I think. What all those things that field and that soil can show us, and tell us if we really look at it. Let's switch gears a little bit, and we'll talk about the planting season and growing season and some of the things we do there. Starting out with our seed, we believe in always using a microbial inoculant on the seed. Let's get a lot of good biology around that seed, so when it's ready to germinate and sprout, it can really take off, and those organisms can really help it. The thing we've used for years is the myco-seed treat, and that has mycorrhiza fungi in it. That's a beneficial fungi that helps to kind of reach out and grab more nutrients, grab more water, really helps that new seedling, that new root, access more nutrients. And then it also has other beneficial bacteria in there. There's a newer product we're working with called EcoMam. I'll show that in just a minute. So there's a couple different options, but the myco-seed treats is what we've used for many, many years and seen it to be so beneficial. these are some pictures of some roots, like 3 weeks after planting, and just a bigger root mass, more fine root hairs. When we dig up a couple plants and try to look at them, you really look at how many like of the really fine root hairs are there versus this plant versus that one. Sometimes they look like the roots are as long as that, but the more fine root hairs you can grow, the more nutrients that plant can access. Because it can reach out and touch more square inches of soil kind of thing than if we just have a few of the main roots type thing. So we're trying to use the microbes to grow more fine roots and just grow a bigger kind of root mass there underneath that plant. That's some alfalfa from a number of years ago. And yeah, it's not only a little longer, but then there's this little more, kind of looks like a little bigger roots, but in reality, it's all those little fine roots that are around each of those roots that make it look fatter, make it look bigger. That was another shot, more fine root mass that we're trying to grow. This was some corn and those early roots. So what we're trying to do, it's not affecting germination per se. Your seed corn can be tested and show it's 99% germ or whatever. It'll all still sprout, but what we're trying to change is what does it do after it germinates? How fast does it grow roots and how fast does it get out of the ground? And things we've seen over the years with the biology is it's going to come up faster, break the ground faster, and then be more even in the emergence. If we get all those plants to come up at the same time, come up consistently, versus, well, this one's doing fine, but then this one's not in any hurry, and you have all this uneven emergence. All the experts in the corn world, they talk about this picket fence look, like getting every plant to come up evenly, and that's how you get like the biggest yield. So you don't have some guys use the term boss plant, a big one, and then you have like a runt next to it that gets shaded out and the ear never amounts to much and that kind of thing. If you get them all even, then they're going to all put on a nicer ear. And works the same way with small grains or hay seedings, grass seedings, things like that. The guys say, well, it just came up even and more uniform, just look nicer all the way across. So I think it's a very inexpensive thing to do, for many cases not more than a couple dollars an acre and it just gets that plant off to a much better start. That was a plot in corn a number of years ago. It was like 10, 12 bushel kind of thing, just from doing the micro seed trees. That was soybeans on a yield map where it was 7 bushel better. Here's the EcoVam. That's a product we just found a couple years ago. This is a water-soluble version. If you think about it, as a water-soluble version of the micro-seed treat. The micro-seed treat is a dry powder that just real fine sticks to the seed by static cling kind of thing. Or at least a bunch of it sticks to the seed. The other half blows in your face when it's a windy day, or something like that. And it's okay, because as long as the seed gets a speck of the MST on it, then it's going to grow and colonize. But a lot of guys say, oh, there's this extra blowing off, and what do I do about that? So this product is actually water soluble, so you can liquefy it, and if you're running anything, fertilizer or stuff in the furrow, you can put it in with that. Just throw it in with your mix and go. Tom's son Chris on their farm, they're doing a lot of that now. You can also liquefy it and then spray it on the seed, like squirt it in the box or in the grain drill or something like that. So just another option, another choice, if you don't like to deal with the dry powder thing out in the field. Yeah, Tom, anything else you want to say about that?
We did some comparisons with the EcoVam dry to the micro-seed treat. Well, we were looking for differences. There was, in the test, there was very little. There might have been a half a bushel to a bushel difference, but not enough that was even significant to report on, I didn't feel. Because there's a lot of other variables out there that could have even caused that, but there was no difference between them. So we know that the EcoVam's doing as good a job as the Myco seed treat. And now with the new one, the opportunity that we have with a soluble one to put it into the starter on the seed is a plus, we feel. Maybe get a little more distribution on your seed, where sometimes people think that the dry, maybe you don't get it on every seed, but like Gary was saying, all it takes is 1 or 2 spores per seed, and I'm sure you probably get more than that at the rate that they're giving you on the dry products. But that has been very impressive to many other customers, just that opportunity again to put it into the seed trench along with your pop-up or your starter.
Yeah, the cost of the products are the same, like per ounce, but if you're going to liquefy it and put it in furrow, you generally have to go a little higher rate than just the powder on the seed, because in a furrow you're also treating the soil in between the seeds. You know, you're dribbling down there versus just treating the seed per se. So there is a little higher than cost per acre if you're going in furrow. But the products themselves are a comparable cost.
Does it have to get on the seed for it to work, or can it be in the furrow for it to work?
In that case, with moisture around the seed, then it's gonna spread, just like fertilizer will and other stuff. So no, it doesn't have to be then exactly on the seed. But if you got dribbling along the side of the trench or something like that, a 2x2, you know, then it's, well, the corn's gonna maybe sprout before it quite gets there, or maybe not be as efficient, as effective as in the row.
And then one thing that we are still learning, but in theory, well, maybe we've already seen this, but we know that microbes, they're living organisms. They move in a soil. So, for instance, right there beside the road, 2x2, and even under the seed, there's a good possibility with the roots growing towards it, and then the microbes growing towards the spreading out into the soil, will actually join with those roots, and you may get as good as what you're putting in the seed trench. I mean, common sense tells me that probably not, but we're still learning that.
They'll get there eventually. It just may not be quite as quickly to then do some good as if it's right in the room.
Do they colonize the root?
Yeah. So then the Bavaria bassiata, or excuse me, the mycorrhiza fungi, that fungi, it actually like lives in the root, basically. Then it has these hyphae that come out, like little white stringy things that reach out and grab more water, grab more nutrients, and bring that into the root kind of thing. So, but it has to have a living root in order to grow and multiply and survive, kind of thing. That's where just like putting the mycorrhiza fungi in with a broadcast fertilizer mix or something like that doesn't really seem to work. You're not getting it right down where the roots are.
As soon as the root can find it, it kind of wants.
There's people that have done it in grass and that, and like in lawns or something, watered it in. Really got a lot of water to move it down into the roots. But to go, like say, spread it out on a dry hayfield or something, I'm not sure you're going to get a lot of return out of that. It's really more for seeding when you start establish a new field, or if you're interseeding, drilling something into an existing pasture, then you can put it on the seed and get it down there.
It's 2x2.
That's where you're putting like a coulter on a planter, and it's going 2 inches away from the seed row, and usually 2 inches in depth in the soil. So it's alongside. If we're putting like nitrogen or some products that can't go right on the seed, you know, you can put them down that way and get it there. Then once the roots start growing, then it's gonna find that. It's only 2 inches away of water that they're gonna move together. It's just not like right in the seed trench.
In comparison, the research tells us that a crop that gets mycorrhiza in its roots, it works in and inside and in on the root. But the ones that gets the mycorrhiza will go through droughts a whole lot easier. About in every case, we've seen increased yield results, increased roots with the use of mycorrhiza fungi. And one thing I will say about AgriEnergy, I like the diversity that they chose to go with. And so not only do we have mycorrhiza in these products, we have trichoderma, we have bacteria, other things that work hand in hand with the mycorrhiza. I mean, if you learn about biology, you'll learn that they actually work together as a team in the soils to give us a lot of things other than just yield. I mean, we've been inundated with the idea that if we don't see a yield, well, it's not worth anything. But we're learning in the biological farming that we may see quality increases with our soil. We may see protection from biology in a way of them handling the diseases better. We're even now seeing where the biology is increasing nitrogen uptake. Gary will probably talk about that a little. And then also making the plant more disease resistant and insect resistant all at the same time.
It was the University of Wisconsin did a study a number of years ago in a greenhouse, and they put mycorrhiza fungi on like half the plants and did not on the others. Then they watered them for 2 weeks, let them start growing. Then they turned the water off. And they found out that the plants with the mycorrhiza survived 10 days longer than the ones that didn't have it. And that's because of the root system and bringing in more ability to reach more water that was in the soil and stuff like that. So really, if it's a dry spring, or we have dryness kind of early on after planting, that can really make a difference in keeping that plant going and actively growing versus not.
How about this wet? Does it look with it? Is it wet?
When it's too wet and everything's floating away, yeah. Well, okay, back any biology, it likes to have moisture, but it doesn't like to be saturated, as well as it doesn't like to be totally dry. So the two extremes just naturally are gonna kind of make things a little anaerobic and knock the populations back some and that kind of thing. If we have a good, decent soil structure and things drain fairly quickly, yeah, but since it's ponded and stays underwater, well, you know what happens when it dries out? That soil on top is hard as a brick, and nothing wants to grow there for the rest of the summer almost. So the extreme situations are tough on biology and our soils and any of that. But if it can drain off, fairly quickly, then the populations grow back and they keep going and that kind of thing. So
You see a difference between versus the MSD at all or not?
we haven't at this point. Just like say the side-by-side stuff that Tom did and a few other guys that have tried both products. Yeah, just other options. So what's more convenient for you, kind of thing.
Steve Dobbins, the first year, of course, a lot of customers were skeptical of biologicals. Steve was kind of skeptical, but he bought into the idea. We convinced him to try it. So this has been several years back now, and he was using the same variety of seed to test it with, and where he put the MST in, he had about a 6 to a 7 bushel increase in yield with that one particular variety. And the germination was kind of poor with that variety anyway, he felt. But the germination he got with the MST was a little bit better. And so that was enough to convince Steve he needed to use some other biological products that we were handling. We ended up, we worked with him probably something like 5 years until he retired. But he then went to using our starters, and I think he also did an ad pack into the side dress program that he was working with. And he's a conventional farmer, and he was one that used ryegrass, and he actually had ryegrass that was growing 2 spades deep. Okay, one spade deep, but it was a good 14 or 16 inches. The only problem you run into with the ryegrass was it became resistant to Roundup. You had to switch over to going with just regular cereal rye instead.
To me, it's ryegrass too healthy. It became more like a pasture or hayseed field than a crop field. Yeah, another kind of group of biology that we like to use on the planter with preceding things is rhizobium. And that's kind of a different critter than the other stuff we're talking about. So that takes a separate product. And then they are specific to legumes. This is what helps grow nodules on a legume. And that's what makes nitrogen that you then can benefit your both itself plus the next year's crop. So there's particular ones for soybeans, for alfalfa and clover combinations, pea and vetch, they go together, stuff like that, variable beans, green beans. We think that's always a good practice to put those on for the couple of dollars an acre that it costs. You always get a good return or yield bump from that. And also, if we invest in that legume crop and help it to fix more nitrogen, that's more nitrogen that's going to provide the next year for our next crop. So you want to make sure it gets nodules and it grows well and is there to help us out the next time around too. A newer version of this that we have is this called Exceed, and they now have an organic liquid for soybeans and for pea vetch. And for many years, there weren't really any organic liquid rhizobiums out there on the market. And now they have this one. So for guys that like to just put it in with their in-furrow mix or dribble down in the row, then it's liquid and you can put it right in with your the Ecovam you're solubilizing and your other nutrients and stuff, and not have to put it on the seed kind of thing. But then there's also still the dry peat that we've traditionally had for many years. Where that's your black sticky stuff you mix in with your seed, and it sticks to the seed that way.
Gary,
those are always good things to do, is to get.
you might tell them that you can use those inoculants, that inoculant together with microseed treat
Yeah,
as well.
yeah. It's not. It's a doing both thing on your legumes, not either or. So because they're totally different organisms and they do different jobs. Yeah, you mix it together. Also, if we have the ability on our planter, it's always good, we believe, to ban fertility and biologicals. So this can either be in the furrow, right in the row, like we've been talking, or this 2x2 or something that's alongside. And that's if you have a colder setup to where it's kind of injecting it into the ground alongside the row type thing. If you're not set up that way and want to try it sometime, it's a lot cheaper and easier to set up something in furrow. Because then really all you need is some kind of a little pump and tubing to go down each of the rows, and some check valves and regulators kind of thing to make sure it's even, going all the rows evenly. That's a lot less expensive than setting up to have to put on coulters on your planter and that whole deal. So if we're going in the row, we love to use the biology plus things that have phosphorus in it as a pop-up. In the organic world, we use fish a lot for that, and some other products that have fish in it, other mixes. If we're going along 2x2, then we have the option of adding some other things in, like a nitrogen product, things that you don't want, like right on the row, right on the seed type thing. So, but generally, if you do this, you can cut your fertilizer cost by about 1/3, because it's 1.5 times more efficient than if you're just broadcasting something over the whole soil. So now we're just trying to treat a little zone instead of treating like the whole other 20-some inches before the next row. We can treat a couple inches versus 30 inches. Takes a lot less stuff to feed the plants that way. It's more efficient. So generally, you can reduce the take savings from what we were going to do more pounds as a broadcast, put that into the row support instead, and do less pounds and gallons, and kind of direct it right to where it needs to go. The other advantage of this, especially in organic, is we're trying to feed the crop, not the weeds. We all know if we broadcast manure or other stuff out there, just over the whole surface, well, we're putting nitrogen, we're putting phosphorus, we're putting starter kind of right next to every weed seed that's laying out there, too. So if we concentrate it right where the crop is going to be, then we're still feeding the weeds that are in the row, unfortunately. Not much we can do about that. But we're not feeding the stuff that's elsewhere. So just in general, we're feeding the weeds less if we go that route. Just some ideas of starters, things that we've done. On the conventional side, it's this 424, and that's kind of a low salt phosphorus mix. We're going alongside the road, and we use the starter blend, which is a more complete mix with all the micronutrients in it and lots of goodies. We always are using our MVP, which is biology, any chance we get. If we're organic, then there's this PKT blend, which is like fish with seaweed and fulvic and a little zinc and stuff that's beneficial to kind of getting that plant started and stimulated. Or some people have fish separately, so that's ram or another kind of fish, and add this add package to it. You get the same thing. If we're on the side of the road, then we can do more of the organic nitrogen type products, like this 202, which has chilium nitrate in it, or M-Force is another organic liquid nitrogen. Yeah, this is all liquid. Yeah, as far as liquid starters versus dry, we really like the liquid because it's available to the plant a lot faster. You don't have to wait for water to break it down and become available. There can still be benefits in putting a dry fertilizer mix, like on a planter through a coulter, but you have to realize it's not going to help that plant right away. It's going to take some time for it to become available. So we're really all about trying to get that plant off to the fastest start, the best start that we can, get it healthy out of the gates, and then that is a whole lot easier to take care of afterwards than if we're like struggling out of the gate, waiting for our nutrients to kick in. So that's why we really believe that liquid is the way to go there. Plus, really, once you're set up to handle liquid, as far as a tank and a pump and things like that, in reality, it's faster and easier to handle than if you're trying to always add a bunch of dry stuff. So this is the benefits of it.
I used filler last year. Got something wrong. But some of the other products, are we to check the certifier?
So with
I expect to come out, and they got on me for using filler.
with micronutrients,
Well, so you should have tested first to see if you need that. And so I guess that's what I'll have to do, I don't know.
So with organic certification, you're supposed to submit your plan to your certifier before you start. Now, like all of us, we don't always know exactly what we're gonna need, what we're gonna do, when we're gonna do it, it changes. But you should at least submit the labels of the products you're gonna use, and let them say, yeah, this is okay to use beforehand. Even if they're armory listed or,
That's
all
what I
these
thought
stickers
all
on
was
them,
listed.
that
But
could
you
be
gotta
fine,
show
but, yeah.
That's deficient.
So then in his case, the micronutrients, if you're gonna apply a micronutrient with organics, you gotta have soil tests or some documentation to show that you're deficient in those. 90% of the tests that we see, they are short, but then there's always the exceptions, something where copper is high or boron is high or something like that. If that is the case and they question it, what we can then do is actually write a letter saying, hey, I'm the agronomist, I'm the one that recommended he use this because he's trying to do this. He's trying to get zinc to his plant to get it off to a good start. Or he needs boron because that helps take up his potassium later on. Just stating why we use these things, basically. And then most of the time, that helps get it okay. There still are situations where the inspector or I don't want to bash certifiers, but the kid that just came out of college and got the job there doesn't understand what it takes to grow corn or something like that. Then we have to work on it more. But we just really try to help them understand why we're doing something. And also the thing with these liquids is we're not putting on 500 pounds of something or whatever. So we're not putting on the levels that are going to be toxic or harmful to anything, even if your soil tests are pretty good. So we just try to educate and get people to understand that. But with organics, it's always good to ask permission first. And then if we have to alter something before you go to the field, we can do that. It's always adds another layer of challenge for things.
Sometimes inspectors can be very intimidating. After you've been organic a few years, you soon learn to know what to talk to them about and what not to. But if they ever do, you have the option of going to your certifier, because inspectors, remember, are always hired, and some inspectors may or may not. Generally, the ones that are not farmers are the ones that become more intimidating because they don't always have knowledge of what's going on. And so we always say, we don't ever want to lose our certification over using something that we shouldn't be using. But on the other hand, if you do have a dispute, go to with an inspector, go to your certifier and clear it with them. It's better really to always clear a product with a label with your certifier before you even use it. And so we're always aware of that. We're always sending in labels to we're GOA, so we'll send a label into Betty and see if it's gonna work or not. And she'll come back and tell you, if there's doubts. And if there's doubts, why maybe it needs a little more research just to get it okayed by that individual certifier.
So in the room, who all do we have that's certified, and who are you working with? I know there's some OPA, GOA. Are there other organizations? OPA. Yeah.
I've never talked to the farmers, but every certifier I've had, usually he's saying off the wall. Ain't never farmed, kind of like an old milk inspector, they've never been on the dairy farm, So, don't understand
And
the true meaning of farming.
right. at least from what I've seen, if you've laid out your plan ahead of time, you've got all your labels, you've got all your records, like you look like you know what you're doing, even if you may not totally know what you're doing. You're at least kind of showing the inspector and the certifier that you have your act together and you're organized. And then a whole lot more things are not challenged or questioned than if you like don't have stuff together. It's just looking like you have a plan and know what you're going to do. This is why I'm doing it. And, kind of showing them that you're a good grower and you know what you're doing. So, but yeah, we try to work with the system how it is as best we can. A little about the MVP. So that's our kind of biological liquid that we like to use anytime we're growing things. So it's more bacteria based than fungi. And all those bacteria, there's a whole group of different ones, they all have specific jobs. Either it's fixing nitrogen or making phosphorus available, or there's a whole list of things that organisms do in the soil, but they're all kind of each have their own niche type thing. A couple years ago, we sent the MVP when we kind of changed that product about 2 years ago, sent it off to have it tested by one of these genetics places that tests the DNA and does the whole kind of profile of it. And there was almost, it was like 140 some different species of bacteria and like 35 different strains of fungi or something like that in there. So there's more than even what's shown on the label or listed, but it's all about getting diversity out there in the soil. Like I said earlier, well, this soil can be different from that soil in different years and weather and all the factors that go into it. We don't know exactly what things that soil needs the most, what organisms, but if we get a whole bunch of just different good organisms out there, then the soil and the way the Lord set up our system is going to balance itself out. And the ones that are needed are going to thrive, and the ones that maybe we don't need that particular time are not going to hurt anything. They're just going to be there hanging out. So we're just trying to build diversity, and it's all things that really help a plant grow and thrive. So we like to put some in anytime we're going to the field and putting something on if we have a growing crop out there, basically. So the residues is kind of for breaking down dead stuff. And that MT17 is more for broadcasting on the soil, to build soil. And then the MVP is when we're growing a crop. That's kind of the short definition of those three, how we use it. So different ways that we use it, like we've been talking in furrow or 2x2 in a starter. Usually go about 2 gallon an acre. This product, our approach is a little different than some of the other products on the market where they're like, oh, just put a few ounces of this on and it's $20 an acre and that'll like make everything work, you know. We like to get more volume, so we're doing a couple gallons and trying to get a lot more just total microbes, total organisms out there in the soil, we think, for the same or fewer dollars than some of the other things that are on the market. We just want to get more volume out there and make more happen with it.
Is this stuff it said conventional, does that mean conventional farming only,
That's
or conventional tillage you're talking?
Oh, conventional fertilizers.
Okay.
Yeah, not organic.
Yeah.
Right. But the MVP itself is organic, but we use it both ways. Just the starter is not organic here. Then organic, then we use the MVP along with the PKT blend or fish, different things like that.
In your case, I think it was pillar that you used.
Yeah, I did. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's still a red flag.
Yeah.
Then Tom will talk, I think, a little bit about insect control. And there's some products that can be added to a starter to help with that.
Go ahead, Gary, I didn't include that.
Well, these two in particular, Ecotech, that's like a botanical. It's peppermint and cottonseed oil and some different things like that. That basically makes insects sick. And then they don't want to feed and don't want to reproduce and eventually die. And that the BioRepel is garlic, and that just acts as a repellent. It chases things away. So if we put some of this stuff right in the furrow, then we're just trying to hold any insects off long enough for our seed to sprout and get some roots to it and start to grow. It doesn't take care of the wireworm or cutworm or something that comes along a little later. But the seed corn maggot and grubs and some of that stuff that's already out there when you plant, it can hold those off long enough to not be as much of a problem. None of this is as, I'll say, guaranteed or a sure thing as what commercial chemicals may be. But in organic, if we want to be natural about it, these things can still be very effective and pay for themselves. And then there's some other stuff you can add there in too that I think Tom will talk about, the SPE 120 and some other things like that. Just to let you know, there's a lot of options of things you can do if you have a particular challenge or something you're dealing with, and we can help with that. This is a picture from Northeast Ohio again, where they did not put on the starter mix organic, the more they did. So MVP, it's got the fish and the ad pack, all in furrow, and then the MST of the seed, and the SPE 120, which is another fungal, beneficial fungi. Here's where they did it and where they did it. And that's what we see a lot. It just comes out faster and more even and with more vigor, and it's just all ready to go. It's instead of jumping out of the ground, instead of kind of waiting there and, well, think about it. It's not quite warm enough yet today. Maybe tomorrow I'll grow. Well, we want it to really have some energy and get out of the ground, get going.
Are we
Very-
recommending starters for the soybeans?
Yeah, this is beans here. And
Yeah, that's what I see.
we don't do near the rates. We don't spend as much money on it, but we still do something. I think I got a couple slides in here of plots that we've done. But it's just to help it get started and get growing faster.
Yeah, Gary, I'm always concerned about how do we pay for this. Well, we've been taught, and I'll go ahead and use this idea with this. But when we use starters, and we've tried them off and on for probably the last over a 10-year period, maybe we've done 4 tests in 4 given years. We use starters every year, but once in a while we'll just leave a starter off and come back and do the yield test on it. And they're running anywhere from 15 to 25 bushel better on corn. This is organic starters on organic corn. So conventional, I'm not sure. Gary probably knows better than I do what the difference is on some yields. I mean, he's seen a lot of this same thing going on with conventional corn. So that is what helps to pay your bill. I mean, if you're looking at corn right now on an organic program, you're probably looking at least $10 a bushel, and you conventional guys know what corn is on conventional. So this is the way that you can justify this. And the more our fertilizer costs go up, it's always equally important that we put that biological in there. And when we started using the biological with the starter, we started to see our yields even go up. When we started, we were seeing 15. When we started using the biological, we're seeing it going up, possibly 5 more bushels the acre.
gonna ask, Eric, do you mind sharing what you've done on in your program? You read something on the planner. right?
Yeah, so we run that furrow, so
Yeah, so MVP,
we
and
got the MVP, we use molasses. I was running like a gives you to a different company, plant-based.
yeah,
Now, we'll come back and side dress, basically, while you're up, then we'll use MVP again, we'll run about 4 gallon. We'll run 4 gallon MVP and 4 gallon of molasses.
yeah,
And run 4 gallon input.
yeah, now it's the organic, nitrogen, liquid nitrogen. Yeah, so we're always trying to get biology and then kind of a good, organic nutrient package together. Whether that's fish, molasses, we use like liquefied potassium sulfate for potassium, liquefied trace minerals for the traces, all those kind of things. There's different combinations, different options we can do, but we're always trying to get those same kind of components in there, as a good starter to get it going, and then doing more later on. So, let's see, yeah, this is up at one of John Daniels' plots in Northeast Ohio here this summer, and this is an Amish fellow who does just a really nice job with his crops. The fields are always